Hey friends, I'm Sabrina, the rookie around here. John and Dick are the old school American fans of F1. Thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation we had about the 2023 Monaco Grand Prix. There was a lot I wanted to unpack with the guys related to this year's Monaco race. Did you see quali? It was magical. Do you think Monaco has earned its continued place on the F1 calendar? I hope you do. To respect your time, we decided to hit some highlights based on my general takeaways and release our deeper dive for a later episode. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Okay, gentlemen, we have what I consider one of the most interesting historic races that we get to see on the calendar. And I want us to settle in and have probably one of our longest conversations on record, or for the podcast at least, to really dissect this. So for any of our audience members, hopefully they realize this is not how long we normally will plan to go. But I think there was so much that happened, not just on Sunday, but over the weekend. And as much as I would love to talk about free practice all three sessions, I think for the sake of time, I'd like us to start with the discussion regarding qualifying. And John, I'm going to throw it to you. Let's talk about the rookies, Sargent, De Vries, and Piastri. I'd like to hear both of y'all's thoughts, yours and Dick's thoughts. But here's where I came at it. This is their moment, this is their moment in their lives that I think that they'll look back at regardless of how their career goes, that they got to race in Monaco. Hopefully this is their first Monaco race, but they competed in F1. There's not many people who can say that. So in that sense, as I was watching the race, I felt really happy for them. Now the actual race and how it went for them, the experiences they had, I have a lot of thoughts, but I really want to hear yours and Dick's first. So, John, would you lead us out?
Sure. Sargent, I think that when he comes away from this weekend and he reflects back on it, he's going to wish that he didn't have a memory. It just was so forgettable and so terrible for him. You had to feel sorry for him. But I will say he did about as good as you can, considering that it was his first time in Monaco, I believe. First time, certainly, in a Formula One car in Monaco. His first time in a Formula One car on wets. Monaco on wets, as we all saw later during the race, is just a disaster anyway, and really, really difficult. So, hats off to him he made it to the end, and you can say that, and that can be a memory that he would have, I think. Piastri, my goodness, he had a great weekend, I thought, and his memory of Monaco is going to be completely different than Sargent's, because I think he really shined and showed why he's in the mix there.
And then what about Sargent?
Sargent deserves to be there, but he's got a long road to hoe. Of course, they were trying to, write him off immediately. And this is one race, and one race does not a career make. And it's especially for rookies.
Dick, You want to add in?
Yeah, I do. First of all, when you think about Sargent, not only is it all the things that John just listed off, he's driving a car that is like an absolute missile in a straight line, but really probably has the least amount of downforce of any of the cars in the field. And so, going to Monaco with a low downforce car, probably not the best strategy, would be my guess. So again, I think people need to lighten up on Sargent. I think, if he continues to have problems and struggle and all that kind of stuff, then that's one thing. But, if you go and you look at how he's performed against Albon, he's really not that far off of Albon, even at this stage. And Alex Albon is way more experienced compared to Sargent. So I think people are being pretty harsh on that kid. They need to cut him some slack. As far as Piastri, yes, no question. That was his best drive. He certainly stacked up against Lando Norris very well. A general comment really is McLaren looks at Monaco like they're a whole lot better than they really are. And what that says to me is that maybe the McLaren's not so bad in the slow speed stuff, and it really suffers in on the high speed stuff. I don't know. I haven't seen the traces or anything like that, but as I was watching it, I was pleasantly surprised because I'd like to see McLaren succeed. And I worked for Zach Brown as a contractor years and years ago. I like the guy. And so I'd like to see them do well. As far as De Vries is concerned, I think his overall weekend was a big step forward. You know, he's had a lot of crashes. His teammate Yuki Tsunoda has consistently outpaced him. But at Monaco, it kind of came right. And Nick made it into Q2. He drove a good race. He brought the car home. And he wasn't just completely dusted over by his teammate. So, and in fact, Helmut Marko went so far as to say that this was the kind of performance that he had been expecting to see from De Vries all along. So, I think, while Sargent may have some clouds hanging over him right now, in 3 days' time, they're going to be taking the track in Barcelona. It could be a whole new story. And with the long straightaway there, all of a sudden the Williams is going to look a little bit better, I think. And the McLaren that Piastri is driving maybe wouldn't look so good. So we'll see. John,
do you want to either agree or disagree with what Dick has just said?
Well, before this race, I'm not too generous with Sargent. And I would have to say after this race, I still think he's got a lot of work to do. He can't keep making mistakes like he's made in previous races. This just wasn't the race where he was making the mistakes. He was just getting beat on. And so I think it's a very fair thing to say that this was not his fault, that the disasters that he encountered were not his fault. And I do think Dick's right. That Williams must be a beast to drive on that track.
Yeah, it'd have to be.
I mean, I feel like I have developed a soft heart for Sargent over the course of this season. I think largely because maybe the identification of him as an American, and I really want to see him succeed. And I know, especially because of the two of you, how hard it is for an American to get onto that grid. And so just was looking at it going, come on, you can do this. And then watching what I felt like you said, the beat on, I just like, this is not in his control right now. And I don't want what he has experienced to either put more pressure on him from outside voices, and then definitely the psychological inside his head. I want him to see that he still has time. I want him to have more time. So I am kind of glad that Barcelona comes up quickly. Hopefully he can wipe all of this out and move forward. De Vries and Piastri, I like the way that you guys juxtapose the two of them. That's really helpful, I think, for me, looking at them in the race, and especially as we move into what I would like to talk about now, which would be qualifying. I was kind of dumbfounded by Perez and the crash in Q1. I'm assuming the two of you were as well, but we also had Joe and Haas and Sargent all eliminated during that Q1. Some of that is I don't know if we could say that was predictable, but the Perez one, I mean, really, John, what are your thoughts on that?
Dumb, really dumb, and even more dumb. How can you consider yourself to be in the hunt for the championship when you go out and the first qualifying at Monaco, you do that to yourself? That there's just no way then that he was ever going to challenge. And frankly, I think this was the race where, because of his qualifying and then his race, which we'll talk about later, he ended his championship run.
Pretty much.
Why do you think that happened? I mean, he's the one that everyone calls the king of the streets, right? I could not, like, watching it, I went, wait, maybe this is some meme that was created, or now with everyone talking about, Chat GPT, maybe this was an AI created thing to get attention at the race or race weekend. And I just sat there so confused. But do you have any thoughts as to why this happened? Either one of you, John or Dick. Dick, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's knowing that his teammate's Max Verstappen and that he's got to try really, really, really hard, to just stay pace with Max. And it's an all too human thing. The harder you try, the worse you get, right? That Sergio's, hopefully what he learned from this thing was he needs to take a step back, relax, don't compare himself to Max, but do his own thing. He'll definitely get better results.
John?
Checo needs to listen to Dick's advice. He needs to stay inside of himself and run his own race. There's so many levels here, it takes so much to get to be a driver in Formula One. That takes a whole level of stuff, opportunity, timing, all that. But then to be in a team where you might win a race is a whole other level of accomplishment and mental adjustment.
Yep.
And then to get into a team where you can actually win a race, but then the final level, which I think is very, very psychologically difficult, is to think long enough, hard enough, and far enough in advance to actually put yourself in the position to mentally be able to take on every week a championship run, to actually target the top of the podium at the end of the season and being winning the championship. And frankly, I like Checo, but I think he just showed that at least at this moment, he is not mentally ready to be a champion.
Wow.
Now, racing against Verstappen is a very, very hard thing, but we saw Nico Rosberg do that with Lewis Hamilton, and we know it was very, very hard for him because he retired after that. But
right,
but you have to get your head in the right place, and Checo's is just not there.
Do you think that? I mean, especially with the stuff that I've read, it seems like Red Bull is very cutthroat. Do you think that they're having a question over his head, not just for the rest of the season, but also for moving forward? I don't necessarily know that Daniel Ricciardo, but there are other people in the Red Bull Academy that could come forward, right? That they could put in, that they could see as a possibility to go side by side with Max.
No, that would be a big mistake.
Really?
Absolutely.
Why would that be?
Well, because Checo's exactly who they need. He's a strong driver who can deliver consistent results, and he's in the best car, and so he can't beat Max week in, week out, but he can come home second or third and secure the team championship. And
right.
that's his role. He doesn't like that, and he wants to think that he has a chance at the championship. But the team's built around Max. It's going to be built around Max, and this is his best year to have an opportunity to win the championship. And he knew that, but he just threw it away this weekend.
That has got to be hard for him to say that the best you're going to, even you give all that you can, and it really will only be second at something at this level, that to wrap your head over that. But at least, like you said, to get to that level and be in that seat in and of itself should be seen as kind of amazing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you think about Sergio for just a second, though, okay, he threw away Monaco. All right, we'll give him that one. But, over the last 2 seasons or however long he's been Max's teammate, he's pretty much done everything that Red Bull's asked him to do. He has certainly made Red Bull a ton of money by being a really good understudy to Max. Yeah, they can't be happy with him, but, I suspect we'll see the old Sergio back at Spain, and he'll have a good result and all will be forgiven. One of those kind of deals.
Don't you think, Dick, in a lot of ways that this really takes the pressure off of him so he can get on with his role in the team?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, I would say that's probably about right. Yeah.
But there's also the work on his part. He has to see his role as what we're defining it as.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to take him. I mean, someone who has put this much of their life into the racing world, he's got to be willing to say, this is my role when you've aspired to winning the championship.
Right.
Well, the math does it for him. He's 39 points behind Max now. To make up that, unless there's something catastrophic that happens with Max or with the car, it's already almost insurmountable without Max, just totally screwing up, and that's not
right. And at this point, there's nothing to indicate that's going to ever happen.
Yeah, I mean, there could be an engine failure or something like that on the part of Max, where the gearbox goes, because we know that the gearbox has been maybe a questionable weak link in the system, so to speak. And all Max would need is be one or two gearbox failures and Checo win, and all of a sudden it's game back on. So,
Right.
I mean, you got to play the game to see how it works, but based on the math right now, it's not looking good.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. This is one of the many reasons I love Formula One. Okay.
I think the other question before we
go
go
ahead.
any further, I think the other question is, let's just for a moment, let's just imagine that Max has two DNFs, mechanical DNFs, and now Sergio has to contend with Fernando. Okay.
Mm,
It depends
yeah.
on the track, but Fernando could sneak in and take a win, because I guarantee you, based on the comments he made after Monaco about tire
Mhm.
strategy and all that kind of stuff, these guys, they've suddenly quit caring about podiums. It's sort of like, we're either going to finish fifth or sixth, or we're going to win. That's the other piece of it, that it's probably a wild card for everybody
Mhm.
to start thinking about.
Let's move on. I don't really feel like we need to go too much into Q2. Lando went into the wall. That was kind of surprising to me. It ended with Piastri, De Vries, Albon, Stroll, and Bottas that were all eliminated during Q2. But let's move to Q3. The battle for pole. I don't know, John, you want to take that start, and then Dick, you can follow up.
Well, this is what I love absolute most about Monaco is qualifying, and the final qualifying Q3 is all of that and a bag of chips. And this one in particular really showed the battle for the final lap was just absolutely just breathtaking, heart-stopping, thrilling, and you just didn't know until the very last second who was going to take pole. And everybody was excited, everybody was happy, and then only one person was happy.
Right.
But Mother McCree, what a fantastic battle for pole. It was really thrilling. I honestly think Max's lap, well, let me say it a different way. I think that Alonso's lap was the second best lap ever for qualifying at Monaco, and it was only because Max's was 1/10 faster.
Yeah, I think, John, when we were talking about this offline, you brought up the graphic by Formula Addict that Dick sent to the two of us.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think Dick ought to talk about that. That's fascinating.
Dick, why don't you take the lead?
Okay, so I'm going to start off with a little bit of a disclaimer here, in that in our last podcast, we were talking about Monaco coming up, and I made the comment that I was expecting to see a titanic battle between Max and Fernando, and I got it half right, because Q3 was titanic. The race, not so much, but qualifying, Fernando, I don't know if you heard it, but he radioed into his engineer, "Hey, I'm driving like an animal." and so, I mean, he put it all out there, and you could tell by the look on his face that, yeah, I may have gotten beat, but I know I left it all out on the track. And so he had to feel fairly satisfied by that. I think it's interesting, though, because there was a comparison, and inevitably, when you start looking at the corner times and that sort of thing, Fernando would edge ahead of Max. But the moment they came to anything that sort of resembled a straight line, the Red Bull would catch back up to the Aston Martin and go slightly ahead. The run up the hill towards Casino Square, when they began the run up the hill, Fernando was a couple of car lengths ahead based on that graphic. By the time they got to Casino Square, the Red Bull was actually just a little bit quicker. And that's just a straight uphill pull. So that's power. In sector 3, of course, a lot of it is a drag race out of the last corner up to the start finish line. And so again, I go back to what I was saying is that, yeah, I'm sure that Adrian Newey has the Red Bull about as efficient as it can be from a downforce to drag coefficient comparison. But I also believe that Honda is one big motor. And I think that those two things are what tip the scale in the favor of Max for that tiny, tiny little margin that he had over Fernando. And of course, if we look ahead to Barcelona, I expect that margin will grow, because that's more of a proper racetrack with long straightaways and those kinds of things. So but it was certainly fascinating. And everybody's assumptions about that Aston Martin being the best car under the brakes and being really, really superb in the low and mid speed corners certainly seemed to bear itself out. And Fernando took that car by the scruff of the neck, and he maximized everything out of that car that he could.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, John, when you said you're like holding your breath, I was like, yeah, oh my, especially, who I was likely cheering for. And then so as each person kept coming, I went, oh, okay, but I could go with Alonso. Oh, okay. And then watching Max pull it out, I went, you know what? I'm not a hater by any means of Max. I'm not a fan. I'm like in between. I'm like, but this, I had to give it. I was like, it's not just the vehicle, the machine, it's also the driver right now. It was quite amazing thing to watch.
Yep.
So when you both were talking, it made me think of something that I posted on our social media for us. It was I think it was motorsport.com had put together some various quotes. And the one that I really liked, they had a series, but it was Damon Hill who wrote, "The most thrilling F1 qualifying at Monaco I have ever witnessed." I thought, wow. Okay. So absolutely brilliant driving from the cream of F1. Amazing. Congratulations to Max. That took total commitment and concentration. What a front row though. Alonso, you star. And then he gave like 3 hand claps. I thought, yep. I'm with you there, Damon, especially with all the talk about everyone discussing Monaco and whether or not it should be on the calendar, which we have another episode on that. And I think we talked about this during that episode about how there is value to this race. And we're going to move into the overall race itself. But after watching that qualifying, I thought people who don't pay attention to Formula One and who think that the races or the energy is on Sunday really need to understand that it all happens at qualifying. And if there was ever a time to prove that, it was this Saturday.
Okay.
Like, this is where you need to be paying attention. So that's kind of my thoughts, except this was a key thing. And again, as a fangirl, I'm going to have to bring it up, is Charles Leclerc and the penalty that he got. And I did read later that Ferrari apologized that they did not let him know that the traffic and that he was going to be potentially impeding Lando. But the fangirl in me just wonders, if that had not happened, how could this race have looked differently? As with a lot of other things that ended up happening on Sunday. But it was just a heartbreaker to see that he was being pushed down the grid. I just have to say that. Any thoughts on y'all's end?
Well, I like a comment that John made a while back about how Ferrari is a circular firing squad. And, they did it again.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't need to worry about the competition. They just need to worry about themselves. Because it's just one blunder after another. It's just remarkable how these guys are able to go and pooch it every weekend, and it's always something new. Now, I know that their race pace was pretty darn good, though, from what I see. So that's, that may be a precursor to bigger things, maybe in Barcelona, for example.
Yeah. Well, and John, you did predict that Charles would get at least one race this season. So maybe we'll still see that. Okay. So here are my general thoughts. And here's the strategy I'd like to employ to discuss the race. So much happened. My brain was swimming after Sunday, just kind of trying to analyze all of this. So what I ended up doing was going to the Formula One website and pulling up the race report. And it kind of comes from, I was inspired to do this a little bit from both of y'all's origin stories that will be uploading soon, about how you both talked about bygone years. You would read the race reports in the back of Road and Track. And I thought, well, let me go find the race reports for this. That surely will help me. So I have pulled that out. I have some of my own comments that I want to throw at you guys. You guys can either agree, well, obviously you can agree or disagree, but give me color that you think I may be missing when it comes to how I'm reading the report itself and thinking about this race moving forward. Okay, so here are my general thoughts. First, tire strategy. It is clear that on this track, tire strategy is key. Second, the rain. The conditions change But my perception is that was foreseeable when you looked at the rain report or the weather report, and that you do know that rain can come in weird ways at Monaco. So the teams, when they're planning their strategy, should have like, especially with Ferrari, option or plan F, G, H, and I, and all the way up to Z, they should have had something in there to think about rain. So once it finally came down, though, I was shocked at like how everyone reacted to this. Like I told you guys offline, I felt like it was when I'm playing with my nephew, who's a toddler with cars, and we roll them down a long way, make them race, that you really have no idea how those things are going to go because they're one of those pullbacks and they're not that great in their aim. I was like, that's what I'm watching with these major cars. Like, come on, guys, what are we doing? It seemed like the cars had a mind of their own. And I kept thinking, was this because of their tire strategy? Because it seemed like everybody seemed to struggle. It wasn't one team, but everybody. But here are the positives I saw. The drivers' skill and risk analysis that they had, their ability, like their ability to analyze the risk, was definitely on display to me as a viewer. Like, and you could see who was experienced, who is more risk tolerant. And that I thought was really impressive. The other thing I noticed was each driver's implementation of his own strategy, as well as his reaction to others and the track conditions, were very intriguing, both in real time and then after I left watching the race, it was over, and just kind of thinking through, how did so-and-so handle this? How did he handle either his intentional plan and when things came out? Like Logan's a great example of, he could have freaked out, could have totally let the fact that he was getting pummeled cause him to just have a DNF, but he didn't. I thought that in and of itself was kind of a success. Again, maybe my soft heart towards Logan. I was confused at how only certain sections of the track experienced the initial, what they were calling it, spitting rain. I thought this was the shortest track of the season that we see. And as well as that like layout of how it is run, I couldn't understand why it wasn't across the board different than what was it you guys have told me in the past. Isn't it the Nürburgring? Yes, yep. That is really long, and you could have two different weather situations happening. Yep. And then let me see, is that my last point? No, two more points, and then I'll totally let you guys respond to me. I liked the way that Verstappen's strategist talked him through that. When I was listening, it seemed like initially he was on edge, like uncharacteristically. It seems like he has, over the years, developed a maturity that he doesn't let things bother him as much as it seemed like he maybe did in the past, even if he might be internally in turmoil. But Sunday, it seemed like to me that there was a slight edge to what he was saying. But then his team helped him to settle down. And then he just like turned, it was like almost like a switch. He just turned it on. Again, like I said, I'm not a fan or a hater, but I was super impressed by that as I listened to his radio. And I listened after the race as well, just to kind of confirm that what I was thinking based off of the clips. And then overall, when I thought about Monaco, what I noted was, it seems to me that it is the place where you say, I can plan for everything, but when it actually happens, I have to trust my plan, trust my instincts, and react to which I cannot control. And it may not work in my favor, but I'm going to do my best to stay focused and get the result I want to get. And now it may not happen, but I'll have done my level best to get there. And you just got to go. More than any of the other races, I think that's how I feel after watching Sunday's Monaco. And this is not just this year's races, but just past years as well. So that was a lot that I just threw you in, just kind of my general thoughts before we go into the actual race summary. So John or Dick, who wants to kind of respond, clarify me in my thinking?
John, I'll let you go first.
All right. Thanks, Dick. I don't think that the rain is necessarily totally foreseeable at Monaco. The way that the mountains are behind Monaco, the track is, it's got a couple hundred feet of elevation change, and part of it sticks out in the ocean. Part of it runs along the ocean, part of it is inland, and it has its own sort of microclimate there. And so, yeah, they saw the radar, but the wind pattern on those mountains can push the rain down the coast away from Monaco or towards it. And so they don't know until it goes over the mountains in many cases. And I think that's what happened in this case is they're watching it on the radar, it's coming in, and then it hits the mountains and it shifted because everybody's radio report that I heard were telling their drivers, it's just going to be a little bit, it's just going to be on part of the track, it's only going to be for a second or two, and then it's going to be gone. And every single one of those guys who have millions and millions of dollars tied up in this were wrong. So it's not foreseeable. And so at any rate, that's kind of the thing about the rain. And that's, I think, is what ultimately caught Alonso out. And really, with respect to strategy, yeah, they've all got plan A, B, C, D, and all down the line. But at the end of the day, what you saw is what really happens in these kind of races. And that is everybody is waiting to see what the other guy is going to do. And what they're hoping one of those guys will do is get them a red flag so they get a free pit stop. And they can think through it and figure out exactly what's going to be the right, or a safety car, so they kind of pile up and get another, bite at the apple. But that's my take on that aspect of it.
Yeah, I agree with John. I would also add maybe a few comments. When you talk about the rain and one side of the track being wet and the other side not being wet, I think it's important to remember that end to end, Monaco's about a mile long. And so it's not that unusual. If you think about just what happens around here, it could be bone dry at your neighborhood, but you go down to the grocery store and it's pouring rain, right? And I think that that's a little bit of what you have here, in that really from, the last turn to down at, the entrance to the tunnel, they're about a mile apart. There's plenty of latitude for a little bit of rain to be falling in one spot and then be bone dry in the other. And based on what I read after the race, Alonso was sort of like, I don't understand why you guys are criticizing Aston Martin and our tire strategy, because when I was out on the track, I told them we need to go to slicks. They put slicks on. I went out, and immediately the next lap I had to come back in because it was raining everywhere. But he said before that, he says, based on what I had seen, track was dry enough that I needed to be on the slicks. So I thought that was interesting. The other part that I think is really interesting is that the mediums did not grain and go off nearly as fast as what everybody thought they would. The prediction had been that the hard tire would go about 55 to 60 laps, I believe, and before you'd have to change. Well, Max got about that kind of mileage out of the mediums. And so he went a long way. I mean, testimony to Max for taking care of his tires, because at one stage he was complaining about the graining and all that. But then he said, hey, later on, they cleaned up and they were working good. In many respects, he won the race because he was on the faster tire, and he made the faster tire last longer than it was expected to go, so that when the rain did come, no problem. Come in, pull on the intermediates, out we go. And so I think in many respects, the race was won when it was dry, and Max just put them in that position to win.
And you can't know what you don't know. And that was where Alonso got caught out. They just didn't know.
Yeah.
And in Monaco, the team has even less view of the track than we as spectators on television have. They basically can only see what we see if they've got live feed from the television cameras.
Right.
All they can see is the cars coming into the pit. I don't even think, if I remember correctly, they can't even see them go past the swimming pool and down to Rascast. So they're limited. They're dependent on the driver telling them what he's seeing. And, in this case, it was changing from moment to moment. Another thing about this is that when it rains in Monaco, because they're regular streets, they're crowned like all of our streets are. They peak in the middle and then they taper off on the side. And so the rain, and at Monaco, as we know, it's uphill and downhill, and around Marabou is that hairpin, and then turn out onto the ocean. The water just flows across the streets there, and the rubber starts coming up, and it gets really slick, and they need to get offline to get the most traction in the rain. When they're on slick tires, and there is no offline at Monaco, so,
Right.
so they're really in trouble.
That's a really good point. I hadn't really thought about the literal mechanics of this, the actual driving, that they would be adjusting and then it not being available to them. Wow. Dick, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I think what John is saying there is absolutely right. On a conventional racetrack, you just don't have that crowning like you would on a regular road course. And so the way you have to drive on a street circuit in the wet is very different than you would on a regular course. Or for that matter, a dry street circuit, you drive it differently. So
okay, well that kind of goes back to the point that I was highlighting. The driver's skill and their risk analysis seem to really be on display. Wondered what your thoughts were on that, moving away from rain. John, do you want to go first?
Sure. This is the moment where you really see these guys' skill. They are so brave and so daring and so willing to take a risk. And the car control that it requires under these conditions, you could even see Max getting out of control, hitting the barriers. But the difference was, most of them were able to touch the barriers a little bit without doing much, if any, damage. Certainly there were enough of them that did damage, but the car control that it takes, I just can't even imagine in these cars, as heavy as they are, as powerful as they are, to accelerate, decelerate, turn, and control the car in really uncontrollable situations. And my hat is off to Kevin Magnussen, because he stayed out there on slicks while everybody else was on. And it was a strategy move, but the team gave him the option, and they said, if you can hang out there, and he's asking, is there going to be a red flag or a safety car? And he was willing to just put it all on the line to stay out there and struggle on the hope that would happen, and he would maintain his position. And that wasn't for first or second or third. I mean, he was, and so that I just can't say enough, give enough praise to these guys' car control.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in the dry, with those guys coming through like the swimming pool section where they literally were grazing the barriers on the inside of the track. I mean, it's just amazing. Just amazing.
And to get the most out of this lap, if you go back and you watch, especially the comparison, because it's easy to find, between Alonso and Max's qualifying lap, it's a good illustration of what these guys are doing and how they're controlling the car, because they're not driving around a turn like you and me and everybody else on the road does. They're actually aiming the car at the barrier, and while sliding enough and having enough confidence that they know how much they're sliding to just kiss that barrier on the inside so that they get the most speed through that corner. And I'll tell you, having done that poorly, but having done that, that's a very challenging thing to do, because you're staring at that concrete or Armco barrier, and you're trying to hit it, you're aiming at it as if to hit it, while powering the car in a slide to get it not to hit it.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm like thinking about how I would be sitting in the car, probably screaming out loud, going, there's no way I could do this. I'm going to die. And yet they are cool as cucumbers. And because they've developed that skill, well, maybe, I don't know if they're cool, but they're just going to do it. That's what they have aspired to. It's kind of amazing, especially because it is a street circuit. So we can have a better mental picture of ourselves in me and my little piddly SUV. I'd be flipping out. Yeah. Thank you,
Yes.
John. I like the way you said that.
So the way
Yeah,
they're thinking about strategy is they're thinking, how can we best preserve our status where we are right
Mhm.
now? And then secondly, how can we take advantage of the situation? Then thirdly, they're saying, when are others going to make the first move? Because they really don't want to make the first move, especially if they got position. And then if we make the first move, how sure, how certain are we that it's the right move? And then the final one, which is what it all really comes down to, is how much are we willing to risk to roll the dice on this move at this moment, given the information that we have at this moment.
Yeah, that's a lot of risk assessment happening in seconds over, I'm assuming also multiple people who are feeding into the data to help you figure that piece.
Yeah, the conversation that you always got back to the drivers when they would ask a question about strategy was, we're discussing it.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, he's trying to stay on track and keep its position while they're discussing it. And he's going, what the heck, guys? You gotta figure something out quick.
Really?
Yeah. 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 I was just thinking of my own personal life and different projects and working with teams where you're the person on the front line and you've sent back the word to higher up and you're like, can you just come up with a decision so I can do it with the customer or with the client? And they're like, oh, well, we're reviewing it. And you're going, time is of the essence here. I'm about to lose the client if you don't do that. Yeah. And I'm not hurtling down and doing as you just said, John, aiming towards the barrier, knowing how much I can just kiss it to move on. Yeah. All the more, I just have such respect for these guys. Okay. What about going to a very practical? I brought up Verstappen and his strategist in their discussion. What'd you think about that? Either one of you. Dick, you want to go first?
Well, I think at the end of the day, they've been working together long enough now that they know how each other thinks. And so, Max can get pretty emotional on the radio, right? Because it's that whole thing, hurry up and make a decision. Don't talk about it. Just, what do you want me to do? And so I think, they've learned how to work with each other long enough now that they're able to kind of read each other's minds. And so it may very well be that, his strategist really is more about keeping Max calm than anything else. Yeah, he's got to make the calls and all that kind of stuff. But I think the other part of it is that he's playing a very vital role in keeping Max from just kind of losing his mind behind the wheel. Because I think Max is still a pretty emotional guy.
John?
Yeah, I thought it was brilliantly managed, but I do think that Max knew that he was in the catbird seat also, and they really didn't. The pressure was not on them to really do anything urgently, as strange as that may sound.
Sorry to interrupt you. What do you mean catbird seat? I've never heard that phrase.
I mean, Max was in total control. It's been, I think, since 1986 that a leader of the Monaco Grand Prix was overtaken on the track. So there have been times when the leader was overtaken through pit stops and things like that. But I don't think since 86 anybody has taken it over on the track. So statistically, as long as he was in first position and as long as he had a gap, which he did have for a pit stop, he just had to keep it on the road until the situation clarified itself enough that then they could make the best decision, not just a decision.
Yep.
Okay.
And I thought that was brilliant. I mean, honestly, that's how Red Bull wins championships, is because they keep that option open for themselves till the last minute. Yeah,
that's really good. Which I think that's the distinction, maybe even with the team Aston Martin. They haven't been in a place where they could keep that kind of option available to them. So maybe that's why some of the calls that they made on Sunday are a result of not having that kind of experience.
You have to not only have the desire to win, you have to learn how to win and have the confidence that you can make decisions that will help win. And yeah, Aston Martin will get there, I do believe, but they're just not there right now.
That ends this conversation. But rest assured, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just two guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, thanks for listening.